they're promoting a movie that we're already here to see.
You got me already. I'm here. You already got me. Your work's done. Welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. My name is Tyler Hunt, and I'm alongside my co-host, as always, Pat Kuhn. You can find us at thenerdspodcast.com, like us on Facebook at The Nerds Podcast, Twitter, Instagram, both also at The Nerds Podcasts. You can follow us on our awesome Letterboxd accounts, where we've both been really active. Pat is at The Nerds Podcast, and I'm at that Tyler Hunt. We also have a YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For, where Pat does weekly streams and gaming walkthroughs and all sorts of fun stuff. So, yeah, now that I'm done pimping all of our things, like I mentioned, as always, here with Pat. How's it going, Pat Attack?
I was waiting for Pat Attack. Like, you didn't say it at first, and I was like, okay, maybe it's gonna go away. And I thought to myself, I was like, should I make a joke about it? But then I was like, no, I'm not gonna, because I want it to go away. And if I remind him, maybe it will continue.
This joke is the herpes of jokes. It's not gonna go away, bro.
Somebody called me Pat Attack. I want to say it was Jeff or maybe it was James, who I know both listen to the podcast. They're friends of both of ours. And somebody called me Pat Attack, and I was like, God damn it. It is spreading. My herpes is spreading.
That's right. Exactly what I had planned. So, don't let him fool you. He loves his nickname. If you see Pat out in public, be sure to call him Pat Attack. He loves it.
No, I don't. Don't yell Pat Attack at me. I will punch you in the dick.
So how's it going, man? How's your week been?
It hasn't been too bad. It's been a good week. I actually am kind of dreading. I have jury selection on Friday. I get out of work, but other than that, I'm not really looking forward to it. It's going to be awkward. I'm already dreading it. So I guarantee you this little intro next week will be me complaining about how weird it was.
Yeah, I'm going to jinx myself and I'm going to get selected next week, but I've never been selected for jury duty or anything like that. So I'm kind of curious what the process looks like.
Yeah, it's going to be weird. So they send you this packet and says, hey, you've been pre-selected and you have to answer all these questions on the packet. And I thought it was kind of weird because they're just generic questions, what's your name, address, do you have any health conditions, do you have any, are you going out of town anytime soon or whatever. It's just kind of weird questions. And I'm like, how does this eliminate anybody? Unless they have a medical condition where they can't serve, then that makes sense. But I answered all the questions truthfully. I was like, okay, so this is happening. There's no way I'm not getting selected if this is the criteria in which you get selected. And then I finally, a month later, got a letter saying, oh, I gotta appear in court on this date at 7:45, and you have to wear business casual clothes. So I wonder how often, well, in Evansville, it's probably pretty often that somebody comes in just shit clothes. Because I work at a big company in Evansville. It's a big deal to work for the company that I do. And I get people coming in for interviews all the time. And literally they're just they look like they rolled out of bed. I'm like, how the fuck did you get why did you think that was okay?
Yeah. I mean, business casual in Evansville is sweatpants and a t-shirt.
Exactly.
So, yeah, for sure, that's what they get most of the time, because there are some shitty people and places in Evansville. So, that'd be interesting. You'll have to let me know what your peers in this situation look like.
Yeah, and it's really funny because on the little letter they say, we pay you to do this. And I was like, sweet. I mean, I didn't expect it to be a lot, obviously, but it's for the day of the jury selection. So what I'm going to is going to determine whether or not I'm actually on the jury or not. It is $15 for that day. A whole $15. I was like, God damn it, I could make $150 if I was at work that day.
Yeah, no kidding.
You're killing me right here.
And it turns out minimum wage at that point.
Yeah, it turns out that the company that I work for, I almost said the name. No, I think I've said it before, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But they pay me the difference. So what I would have made that day, which makes sense because literally if I was on a jury for any extended period of time, because if you get selected, it's $40 a day. It's just that this day is the $15 day is just a selection. So I was like, if I'm on a jury for any extended period of time, like we're fucked. Like we're not going to be able to pay our mortgage or whatever. So that's pretty cool. I mean, I guess they would have to do it. I mean, people can't afford to be on a jury for, more than 2 weeks if I'm only making $40 a day. So it would have been kind of awkward.
Yeah, I think that there's some legal obligation there for sure to take care of people who get selected. But who knows? Maybe you'll get selected for some crazy trial and you'll be like holed up in a hotel like the OJ trial or something and not able to talk to your loved ones. And what would we do about the podcast? Yeah, what would we do about the podcast?
That was, I think it tells you a little bit about myself that immediately when I thought about, because I've had this like thought process before, I'm like, what am I going to do about the podcast? Like, forget Chrissy, like whatever, she'll live. But I was like, what are we going to do about the podcast? We got the Meg review coming up. So I can't miss that.
I think that's even worse than not being able to do the podcast is that you wouldn't see the Meg right away.
I know, spoilers,
it's
right?
Being spoiled for you for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really nervous that Rainn Wilson is going to get eaten in that movie, and I don't want that spoiled for me.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that one. I
don't know how you can't not be looking forward to that movie because it looks awesome. It looks so good.
Yeah, I just really hope it doesn't take itself too seriously. As long as it has fun with itself, I think there would be some enjoyment there, but I don't know that Jason Statham is somebody that can have fun with himself.
I think when he's masturbating, he probably has fun with himself. Hey-o!
As soon as I said that, I knew there was a masturbation joke in there somewhere.
I could not do it. Like, you set it up so perfectly. I was like, I could not do it. I wish I had come up with a clever joke, but yeah, I'm not that clever this morning. But before we get started, we've already kind of bullshit for a little bit, so we'll try to make this short. But I'm sure you already know this, Tyler, but this is our 200th episode. I
forgot that it was our 200th episode. That is awesome. That's a lot.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted us to chit chat for a little bit, just kind of be a little self-indulgent for a little bit. So if this is your first episode, you could just skip to what we're into. You can check the show notes if you don't want to hear us bullshit about how awesome we are at podcasting for a few minutes. But let's just make this short because, like I said, we were already kind of talking for a little bit. But what do you feel about being at 200 episodes? That's a huge deal.
Yeah, man, it is. And it's hard to believe that we've done this as long as we've done this. It doesn't feel like it. You know, it's part of my weekly routine. And I'm not going to lie. I mean, there are some Sunday mornings where I wake up and it's like, I got to record the podcast. But like 9 times out of 10, this is the highlight of my week. Just being able to sit here and bullshit with you. And it gives me a reason to watch a lot of the things we review and keep up with my comic books. And it's just become a really integral and huge part to continuing nerddom into adult life, which is awesome. I don't know what either of us expected to happen when we decided to do the podcast, but I know our heads were both in similar spots when we decided to just go for it. Was basically you and I were both really big fans of a lot of different podcasts that we listened to. And at the end of the day, we kind of looked at each other and said, why can't we do this? Like, we already have these conversations every time we're together. Why can't we just hit record and go with it? And sure, we're not the biggest nerd culture podcast out there, but I mean, we have a group of listeners that I really appreciate, that, you know, respect and want to listen to us every week. And yeah, and I mean, not only all of that, but to get mushy for a second, it gives you and I a reason to stay connected, especially now that I've moved to Cleveland. So yeah, man, like this is one of the prouder, this is going to come across as really bad because obviously I have a wife that I love, but this is like one of the things that I have in my life that I'm proud of, that I'm really proud of because again, we're very consistent. It's fun and I feel like it is defining for me in a way, especially as a nerd. So yeah, it's obviously been really important to me for the last however many years we've done this. Like, what is it? 6? Does that sound right?
I think it'll be 5 come November. Yeah.
5 in November. Like, that's crazy. That's half a decade we've been bullshitting around with this. So yeah, man, I couldn't ask for a better co-host to be doing it with. And obviously it's a big part of my life.
Yeah, for sure. I'll just second everything that you said. I'm extremely proud of just the fact that we've been able to do this for as long as we have. And we've been, like you said, very, very consistent. And we very rarely ever skip a week. I mean, I don't think we ever skipped a week when we were bi-weekly. So for those that are doing the math, we're weekly, but we're only at 200 episodes after 5 years because we were bi-weekly for a couple of weeks, or for a couple of years. And so I think that the proudest that I think I am is just the fact that we've just gotten so much better. Like you said, we have these nerdy conversations, but I think the podcast has really helped me at least kind of be better at looking for certain things in movies. Like I would be always, and I don't know if it was necessarily like looking for it, but like I can articulate things, not just about movies, but I think as a person, like I've grown to be able to articulate my thoughts a lot better because I have to do it every week for the podcast. And like, I can't just say, oh, that scene was awesome. Well, I do sometimes, but like, I feel like I can articulate things a little bit better than I used to be able to. So, that's kind of the proudest thing that I think I've gotten, from this. But yeah, just kind of second what you said, like, I honestly don't think that I would have done this for as long as I have if it hadn't been you that I'm doing it with. Like, I honestly, like, we'll sit at Indie PopCon and just bullshit and say weird shit at the booth. And I honestly think, to get kind of cheesy and mushy, but I think that I'm at my funniest when I'm kind of bouncing stuff off of you. So I couldn't have picked a better person to do this with.
Yeah, man. And for our listeners out there, this is the episode where Pat and I finally get engaged.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say kiss, but I mean, that's for sure has already happened.
Yeah, no, 100 times at least.
All right. So now that we got that out of the way, for those that this is your first episode, you're welcome back. We start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. We call it what we're into. So what are you into this week?
I might be, shooting myself in the foot with this one because I think that this could possibly be a show that we go back and review later this year whenever this first season wraps up. But this week I did dive into Castle Rock, which is a Hulu original show that's based on the characters and settings by Stephen King. And that's actually literally what it says in the credits, is based on the characters and settings by Stephen King. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But the first 3 episodes of this show are available, and unlike Netflix, they don't release it all at once. They release it weekly. So they release the first 3 episodes, and then every Wednesday from here out, they'll release another episode of this first season. I'm not sure how many episodes it is. I want to say 10, but I don't have that based in fact, so it could be longer than that. But again, the first 3 are available, and I've watched the first 2. So I have not caught up with all of the available episodes yet, but I did want to bring this show up because it's definitely in our wheelhouse, being based on Stephen King's work. So the show circles around a few different things, but the main story, or what seems to be the main story so far, revolves around a character named Henry Devers and a mystery inmate at Shawshank Penitentiary that is played by Bill Skarsgård, of course, who we know as Pennywise the dancing clown from the newest It movie. So in Shawshank, there is a corrections officer who's played by Noel Fisher, who I know mostly from Shameless, but he's also the voice of Michelangelo in the newest Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. But anyways, he's a correction officer, and he basically finds this mystery inmate locked up in a small cage in an underground wing of the prison that the former warden had chosen not to use and kind of had blocked off. This character, played by Bill Skarsgård, doesn't speak, and no one knows who he is or if he's even a prisoner at the jail or at the prison. The only words he eventually says are Henry Deaver, which again is one of the main characters. He's kind of a local urban language or urban legend of sorts to Castle Rock. He's played by Andre Holland, for what it's worth. I'm not really familiar with him, but I do know he was in Moonlight and a couple other things recently. He grew up in Castle Rock, but later moved to Texas, and he's a defense attorney in Texas. And the whole urban legend around him revolves around him going missing when he was a child. He's later found by a police officer with no recollection of what had happened. And around the same time that he's found, his adoptive father is found dead. So people are thinking that he did it, but again, he can't remember, and there's no proof either. So anyways, all of that kind of led to him leaving the town. But when this inmate says his name, that's the only thing that the inmate said verbally, he's anonymously tipped off and heads back home to kind of see what's going on. So once he's back in Castle Rock, he reconnects with his adoptive mother, who's played by Sissy Spacek, and the ball kind of starts rolling around the mystery of this inmate and the overall mystery surrounding this town. So that's a lot. And of course, there are other plots and other things that happen as well that I'm leaving out for spoiler purposes, but that's kind of a generic recap of what's going on in this show so far. So what I will say is that it's a very slow start into these 2 episodes. It's also very layered. So these first 2 episodes are almost more about adding layers than pulling them back to reveal anything of substance, which I'm not necessarily complaining. I mean, I get why they have to do that. And overall, I appreciate what they're attempting to build for this season. But at a certain point, you're kind of wanting some answers. And the show is not hell-bent on giving those answers to you right off the bat. The one thing I would say about this show from a negative standpoint is that it's very genre. And specifically, it's of the Stephen King genre. And normally that wouldn't be a bad thing. But I know, Pat, you and I kind of talked about this when we did our Fortnite Friday stream. But there are tons of Easter eggs in this show. And right now, you can tell that it's kind of based on Stephen King's stories and settings because it's shoved down your throat a little bit. But there's no substance to it being based on anything by Stephen King. So obviously this is like an original story, and it's just little things here and there. Like there's a character named Jackie Torrance, and, you know, it takes place at Shawshank Penitentiary. And, you know, they even at one point like reference the Shawshank Redemption movie, like the events that take place there, or in that film. And just little things like that. Like there's a point where a guy's digging up a dog to make sure it's not still alive. Like just little things here and there are cool. They're cool nods, but it makes me really I don't want to say upset, but it really confuses me as to why it was so important to bring that kind of stuff into it, because it's not actually adding any substance to the story they're trying to tell. So are they trying to make a mystery interesting just by making one of the locations Shawshank Prison, or is there going to be more Stephen King mythology brought in that will pay off? And right now it's just not paying off, and that's what's irritating, I think, because that's the biggest selling point of the show, right? I mean, that's the reason I'm watching it, is because it's based on the work by Stephen King and it's produced by J.J. Abrams, but I don't think that his material is being utilized to its fullest potential right now. So, I mean, it's still very early in the season, so I know that the show is asking more questions than what it's answering, but I really hope that parts of the story start to fill in so that it doesn't feel like a hollow mystery that leaves too much up to interpretation.
Yeah, I think you answered your own question there while you were talking. Like, I wanted to chime in, but I feel like you were going to get there eventually. You're only watching this show because it's based in the world of Stephen King, and you're wondering why they did these little Easter eggs. Well, it's because they want you to watch this show, and the only reason you're watching a show called Castle Rock is because it's based in this world, and they have to give you something. Like, they can't just do this mystery, say it's based in the world of Stephen King, and not give you the Shawshank Prison and Pet Cemetery stuff. And it seems pretty lame, and hopefully it gets a little bit better as far as, like, the references to Stephen King. Maybe something actually happens that involves one of his stories. That would be kind of cool. But my guess is probably just gonna beat around the bush.
Yeah, and even bringing... I know that he was cast before it got, like, rave reviews and made a ton of money, but, like, having Bill Skarsgård in the show, and then having Sissy Spacek in the show, who played Carrie in the original Carrie movie, it just seems a little too on the nose for it to not matter. So I hope that it all ends up mattering, but, yeah, we'll see.
Well, I mean, I hope that it's good. Like, the thing that I was most intrigued by this show is, I mean, the Stephen King stuff, I wouldn't even know this show existed if it wasn't for the Stephen King stuff.
Sure.
But, like, obviously our hope with everything, but especially with this show, is that it won't matter. The Stephen King stuff won't necessarily matter, that maybe it'll just be a good show, but it doesn't sound like it's all that interesting just yet.
No, it's not. But again, I'm going to keep up with it for sure. I plan to watch the whole season, and I think that they are trying to tell a good story, and I think that there is some potential to the mystery that they're setting up. But at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to me as if the Stephen King stuff is a gimmick or if it's actually part of the story. And I know I'm kind of talking in circles here, but that's where I'm at with the show. So all that set aside, what are you into, man?
So I went and saw another movie. I've been seeing a ton of movies with the AMC A-list. I went and saw Teen Titans Go to the Movies, which is kind of like a follow-up to the series. And you already mentioned we did our Fortnite Friday this past Friday, and we were kind of talking about this. And you had mentioned that, and I didn't know this, I just knew that it was a show that went on for a while, that it's not like super popular, that show. Like, people don't actually like that show very much, which I never watched it, so I didn't know that. I just assumed that it had a following because it was on for so long. But basically, this movie, Teen Titans Go to the Movies, and I'm not gonna pronounce this guy's name right, but it was written and directed by two guys. The first one is the creator of the series, and the other guy writes for the series, as far as I understand. The guy that created the series is Aaron Horthoff. No way that I pronounce that right. I don't know why I do that to myself. It's like I'm gonna start saying the director and the writer and the artist when we talk about comic books, and then I always embarrass myself by saying their names wrong. Anyways, the guy that helped direct it and write it is a guy named Peter Ross Mitchell. And so for those that don't know, this movie is essentially about the Teen Titans, obviously, and they're like obsessed with superhero movies. And they're like very concerned and curious why they haven't gotten their own movie. And they realize that through the course of the first like half of the movie is that because they don't really have a arch nemesis. And so they're like convinced that if they were just to get this person, that they would get their own movie. And so, that's kind of what this movie is about, is them trying to get an arch nemesis and then of course get a movie, made about it. And I didn't know anything about this movie. Honestly, if I didn't see The Incredibles 2, 2 months ago, whenever that was, when that came out, and I saw the trailer for this movie, I would have never known that it was even coming out. But that being said, the trailer did remind me a lot of how I felt when I first saw the trailer for the Lego movie, just because I assumed that the Lego movie was just going to be like a product placement, like cash grab when it was first announced. I think if I'm remembering correctly, like I used to listen to Hollywood Babylon. I don't listen to it very often anymore. It's a Kevin Smith podcast, and they do a segment about movies that'll suck. Like they do like kind of like a nerd news thing where they talk about like movies that just got announced and they call it movies that will suck. And I believe the Lego movie, when it first got announced, they made fun of it. They trashed it pretty hard because that's what they thought it was going to be too. And obviously it wasn't. It was far and away better than it deserved to be. So, going into this movie, I just kind of assumed like, oh, well, it's just going to be a silly like Teen Titans movie. Like I'm not going to be interested in it. But the trailer made me think exactly how I felt about the Lego movie going into it, was that it was just really funny. It had the right tone to it. It was very sarcastic and meta. And so I was like, man, this movie might actually be good. And then I watched it last night, and it's not a bad movie by any means. Like, I'm not upset that I saw it by any means, but it just tried so fucking hard. Like, way too hard. Like, it tried way too hard to be funny and meta, and a lot of the stuff, and I think this is ultimately why I didn't really enjoy it, and I was kind of bored during it, is because a lot of the stuff that they were trying to do, I've seen in other movies already. Like, if this movie came out like 3 or 4 years ago, maybe I would have enjoyed it a little bit more, but like that whole arch nemesis stuff, like we kind of saw that in Lego Batman movie a couple of years ago. Like, that's not something that is new and fresh right now. Like, we had the Joker and Batman story in Lego Batman, and like that's essentially what they were going for in this movie. And a lot of the stuff, the meta superhero stuff, like I've seen that before. they try to do like this Stan Lee cameo thing where he's kind of like in the background, like photobombing them, and then like that scene kind of ends, and then they even like do a close up with Stan Lee, and then he's like, "Oh shit, this is a DC movie. I got to get out of here." And like, if they just had the photobombing thing, like I think that would have been funny. But then they had to take it to a whole new level to make sure that everybody got the joke. And I think that that's kind of the perfect example of what this movie is. Like, they could have gone at like a 7 the whole movie, but every time they decided to turn it up to 11. And that's the thing that bothered me, is that they tried so fucking hard. I mean, there are a couple of funny spots in this movie. I think that there's one really early in the movie where they're like explaining who they are to like this villain that they're fighting, and they do like this, like a couple of minutes of like this rap, and while they're doing the rap, the villain just kind of walks away and starts destroying buildings again, and they're completely oblivious to it because they're really into this rap, and I thought that was kind of funny. And then the Justice League comes over and kind of cleans up their mess, and so I thought that was kind of funny. And then there's this really weird scene where they're kind of making fun of like the training montage songs in all these movies. And it's just like this song that's like, they just keep saying, it's upbeat. Like that's the whole chorus. And it's sung by a polar bear in like this 80s, like, button up shirt and sunglasses. And it's, I knew I recognized the voice, but apparently it's sung by Michael Bolton. Is this polar bear? And at the very end of the song, they're like going on a road trip while they're singing it. And all of a sudden the polar bear's like in the middle of the road, and they hit it and like run over him, and they do like a little hit and run thing. And that for some reason made me laugh so hard, because it was kind of dark for this like little kiddie movie. And I just thought it was such a weird, thing that they did, that it made me laugh pretty hard. But yeah, other than that, I was pretty disappointed with this movie. And I think, like I said earlier, I think most of that is just because we've seen all of the stuff that they were trying to do done better in other movies.
Yeah, so whenever this movie was announced, I would have never thought I would have had any interest in it. I know you mentioned me bringing up that people don't really like this show, and I think kids like this show, but I think that it upset people because this show came out after like Young Justice was canceled, if I remember correctly. And Young Justice is more in the line of Batman the Animated Series, and it's something that was a lot more serious. And then this show is kind of in the line of something like SpongeBob. So I will say I thought that the trailer looked really funny, and if I had AMC A-List and an AMC that was nearby my house, I would definitely go see it this weekend. But unfortunately, I have MoviePass, and they are struggling to stay afloat and taking out $5 million loans to pay for movie tickets. And they have like a $6 surcharge to go see this movie this weekend. And I kind of refuse to do it. So, I will watch this movie at some point. I'm glad to hear that there were some redeeming gags and redeeming jokes, but I think that your review of it kind of was what I expected. Like, I didn't expect anything crazy, but I thought that there was maybe some good to it because it has such a good score on Rotten Tomatoes right now. So, my question out of all of that though was that Stan Lee's voice?
I haven't looked it up yet, but it sounded like if it wasn't him, somebody does a really good Stan Lee impression.
I think it would be even better if they would have got him to voice it. Just because of that, like this dude, like not a care in, well, I don't want to say not a care in the world. Obviously that guy has a lot of cares right now. He's got a lot going on in his personal life, but he's just like, yeah, I'll do whatever fucking movie you want me to. I don't give a shit whether I was involved with these characters or not, which I love.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny. They do make some Deadpool references, which, okay, so Deathstroke, his real name is Slade Wilson, right?
Yep.
Okay. So he was the villain in this movie, but they kept calling him Slade. And I'm very curious, and I forgot to look this up because I didn't get home until like 1 o'clock in the morning last night, and I knew we were going to record early this morning. So early, it was 10 a.m. We recorded at 10 a.m. But anyways, it's early when you go to bed at like 2 o'clock in the morning. But I wonder if it has anything to do with the Batman movie. Like, are they not allowed to say Deathstroke? Because they called him Slade in The Slade in this movie. They never once called him Deathstroke.
Did they ever even say the word Deathstroke?
No. They call him Slade. That's his name in this movie. Like, even if you go to IMDb, Will Arnett does the voice of him.
Yeah.
And which he does a really good job. I mean, it just sounds like Will Arnett. But I was like, is Lego Batman in this movie? But yeah, I mean, they never call him Deathstroke, not one time.
That's strange.
Super weird. They do make a Deadpool reference, and it's pretty funny. I mean, I saw it in the trailers, but like he mentions, like, even Deadpool, like they based it off of Deathstroke. Like, they even called him Wade Wilson to kind of make fun of the fact that Deathstroke's name is Slade. Like, they did it on purpose, and they even say something in the movie about how, like, Deadpool copied me. I was here way before him and all this stuff, but they kept calling him Deadpool, and that gag was kind of funny, but I'd seen it in the trailers, so it definitely had some diminishing returns.
Yeah, I don't know why they would not say Deathstroke. That's weird.
Yeah, it was totally weird. But like I said earlier, even with the Stan Lee stuff, I think, like, to give them the benefit of the doubt, I mean, it is a kid's movie. So it's like, maybe you have to turn it up to 11 so you make sure that the kids get the joke. But I mean, we've talked about this before, but that's the glory of all these, like, Pixar movies, is they're good for kids, but also, like, they have stuff for adults in them. And I think that this movie had the potential to be that. They just never, I don't know if they just didn't feel confident that some of these jokes would land if they didn't make them super obvious or try really hard. But I just, that was what really, really turned me off of this movie. I really wanted to like this movie, and it tried so hard, and it just wasn't interesting to me.
Gotcha, man.
All right, so our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two each episode. So what did you read this week?
I read Justice League Dark #1, which is written by James Tynion IV and drawn by Alvaro Martinez Bueno. So obviously the name that stuck out there to me was James Tynion. He was the most recent writer on Detective Comics, and I personally was not a fan of his Detective Comics run. I think we actually talked about that on our last episode. This comic starts off a storyline called The Last Age of Magic. So this is chapter 1 of that. And overall, like, before I get into the details, I'd say this book is okay. It's not great. It's not bad. I think sometimes I like the idea of the Justice League Dark more than the actual stories that get told with the characters. This book does flip the typical lineup on its head a little bit, and there were definitely some cool parts of the book that I'll get into, but if it comes down to a supernatural magical threat like this book, or versus a grounded or cosmic threat that we would see the regular Justice League interact with, I think I'd take the regular Justice League. But it is what it is. So this book starts with Zatanna doing a magic show. There's a narration from her that is always good to start with a trick that people know to set up the boundaries of what's to come in the rest of the show. And as she goes to pull a rabbit out of her hat, she finds that the rabbit is dead. So she knows something bad is coming, and some kind of dark magic starts to spew out of her hat and attack the audience. Wonder Woman comes to the rescue, and after subduing the threat, she invites Zatanna to join her fight, but and I guess I should explain what her fight is. Her fight is that apparently users of magic everywhere are experiencing things like this, and not all of them are walking away. In fact, many have died like these horrific deaths, so we end up seeing some mangled and deformed cadavers later in the issue. But long story short, Zatanna says no to Wonder Woman's request, and the characters kind of move on from there. Diana goes to this place called the Oblivion Bar to drink away some of her problems and fears of this threat against magic, and luckily the bar owner, Detective Chimp, is ready and willing to help. So Detective Chimp is obviously a pretty goofy character, and it shouldn't be a surprise that he was created a long time ago when comics were a tad goofier, but here he is, part of the Justice League Dark team, and I'll admit, I kind of like his addition. He's kind of a funny character. So, the other weird member that is added to the group is Man-Bat, aka Kirk Langstrom. And yes, that's the Batman villain that we know. He's like somehow kind of controlled his form, and he looks like a bat person, but he has the consciousness of the scientist, kind of similar to maybe like Hank McCoy with the X-Men. He has some great moments too, and he was sent to help Wonder Woman by Argus since Dr. Langstrom is trying to redeem himself. He at one point makes a comment that, it wasn't his life's mission to turn into a bat creature and try to eat Batman. So he's definitely just trying to redeem himself in that regard. I don't want to spoil too much, but by the end of the issue, Swamp Thing and Zatanna end up joining the cause, and this looks to be the Justice League Dark lineup that we'll be rolling with for the foreseeable future. So again, it would be Wonder Woman, Detective Chimp, Man-Bat. Every time I say Detective Chimp, I laugh. Man-Bat, Swamp Thing, and Zatanna. So I mentioned when I started kind of this recap that the magic aspect always kind of deters me a little bit from stories like this, but I think what I like most about this comic is the inclusion of Wonder Woman. She self-admittedly in the book is out of her element here since she has no experience with magic like this, but what's driving her is just genuinely wanting to help people, which is part of why I love the Wonder Woman movie so much. The other thing I want to say about this book is that the art is fantastic. I mentioned that there are some horror elements to the book, especially later in the issue, and it's all drawn really, really well. Like a lot of number ones, there is quite a bit of exposition to explain what's going on, and a few pages are very, very wordy. But I think I'm going to give this book another issue or two before I make a decision to keep it or drop it. I'm holding out hope that this may be the perfect combination of goofy and horror, and that it will be a fun run. But again, I think it's going to take a couple more issues to really get into the groove and answer that question.
Yeah, I always have thought that the Justice League Dark was a cool idea, but anytime I ever sat down to read it, it just wasn't my cup of tea. So yeah, you had texted me and called dibs on this, and I was like, go for it, man. I had no desire to read this because, like I said, I really do enjoy the idea of it, like this weird Justice League team up, because I'm kind of a sucker for team ups, especially in comic books, but I just never could get into it. Like, usually Constantine is part of the group, and a Swamp Thing, which I like both of those characters, so I have always liked the idea, but I could just never get into it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it too. I know I mentioned that. I like the idea of it, but I don't really end up ever liking the stories they tell. Like, they did a Justice League Dark animated movie a couple years ago, and I was so excited for it, and then it was just really lame. So yeah, I don't know. I'm hoping that this one kind of redeems the idea for me, but it may be my last go with Justice League Dark for a while. So, what'd you read this week?
So I want to follow up on something that I brought up with when it came out originally with the number one, and that's Lucid Dreaming number 5. So for those that weren't with us when I talked about this a few months ago or don't remember, it was written by Max Bemis, who is most known for, he does a lot of stuff. He writes Moon Knight for Marvel as well. So, he's kind of an accomplished comic book writer, but he does, what I know him from is that he's the lead singer of one of my favorite bands, which is Say Anything. And the artwork was done by a guy named Michael Dialis, and this was put out by Boom Studios. So, like I said, I've talked about this book before, but it was a 5-part miniseries, and obviously it just wrapped up the other day. So, this book is about a teenager named Lucy, which is kind of cute because Max Bemis's first child is a daughter, and her name is Lucy, so it's kind of cute there. And she finds out that she has the ability to actually live within her dream world, and so it kind of goes from there. And like I said, it's a 5-part miniseries that just ended the other day, and so I just kind of wanted to follow up on what I felt about it. So I was pretty positive when this book first came out. Obviously, I'm kind of biased because I do like him, but I have talked about in the past that I'm not the biggest fan of his comic book writing. I've never read his Moon Knight, but there's been a couple of books every once in a while that he does write that I'll check out, and I'm just never all that impressed with his comic book writing. But I was really digging this book after the first couple of issues, and I think after the third issue, I was gonna talk about it again, just to kind of follow up from the number one, but unfortunately, that issue number 3 is super boring. It's very, very exposition heavy, and so I was like, well, if I talk about that, I'm not going to really have a whole lot to actually talk about in the episode, so I had to pick something else. I don't remember what eventually it was, but I just decided, okay, well, that issue was kind of boring. I'll wait until issue 5 comes out, and then I'll just follow up and talk about the series as a whole. So that's what I'm doing. So issue number 3 was pretty boring. Like I said, it was very exposition heavy. And then this book really is very disappointing ultimately, because it does not end the way that I want it to end. It's kind of weird, because normally, like, when I criticize something for like its runtime, like if we're talking about a movie and I'm like, oh, well, this was a 2-hour movie that needed to be like an hour and a half or whatever, it's usually too long. And I actually think that this miniseries was too short, because I was reading the 5th issue and they were introducing stuff, and I'm just like, how are they going to finish this up in 20 pages? Like, they should not be introducing this stuff issue 5. So I think they either needed to trim some stuff, or they needed to make it like 8 issues, because they do introduce some really cool stuff in like the 4th and 5th issue that I really wanted to see how it ended, but it just felt rushed. Like, everything just like tied together in this neat little bow in issue 5, and it just really kind of bugged me. It just felt super quick, and there was so many cool things that they introduced that they could have had a couple of more issues and really had fun with it. And unfortunately, I don't know if that was his decision or Boom Studios' decision. I don't know who made the decision ultimately, but it just felt really rushed, like I said, and I was kind of disappointing. And ultimately, I just didn't like the book at the end. Like, I just think that they had some really cool concepts there, and maybe he just didn't feel confident that he had enough story for 8 issues or whatever to expand it. But I just think that it would have done itself a lot better, and would have been a more satisfying story if we could have seen some more issues. And I will say that his writing is definitely very wordy. There is moments where there's a lot of exposition, and there was a moment, it was either in issue 4 or 5, where this character, and I think it was issue 5, where this character just like goes on this long monologue about shit, and it was kind of vague and kind of confusing, and I wasn't sure exactly where he was going with it. And then literally it goes on for a couple of pages, and then one of the characters makes fun of it. Like, how it was super vague and exposition. They literally use the term exposition. And I was like, no, man, you don't get a pass. Like, you don't get to do that and then make fun of it and then, oh, okay, we're good. No, you don't get to do that. That's not how it works. Like, you don't get to just go on this like exposition heavy rant and then just poke fun of it at yourself for a little bit and then we're good. That's not how it works. So I will say that if you were kind of waiting to see how this ended, and you were kind of waiting just to see how I felt about this book, I would just go ahead and say skip it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely be skipping it. It sounds like I'm surprised that it didn't go longer, because I can't imagine Boom Studios has too much else going for it.
Yeah.
Nothing against, I'm sure they have some great stuff out there, but, you know, having the lead singer, as you said, was Say Anything, right? Write a comic for them. Like, you got to imagine that brings a whole fan base. So it's surprising to me that it didn't go longer. But again, maybe it was his choice, not theirs. So
yeah, I was just ultimately disappointed, like I said.
Cool, man. So you ready for some nerd news?
Yeah, it seems like we actually have a decent amount this week.
Yeah, and we're going long again. This is like the 3rd week in a row that we've been at like the 45-minute mark, almost getting into nerd news. So, I'll go somewhat quick, but again, like you said, there were typically the week after Comic-Con is light, and there were some decent things that came out. So the first is not decent, but I did want to bring it up because it makes me chuckle. Apparently Ryan Reynolds is developing a movie in line with the Home Alone saga called Stoned Alone, and he may or may not star in it. He's definitely producing it, but it's basically a guy gets so stoned that he misses his flight, and then he's paranoid that somebody's breaking into his house, but then people actually are breaking into his house. So I don't know. I think it'd be funny if they got Macaulay Culkin to do this movie, and that it was in continuity with the first Home Alone movie, but I doubt that would happen. But, you know, everybody that loved that movie in 1992 or whatever is about our age now, and I think would get a kick out of an adult Home Alone movie like that. But I don't know, man. This is just kind of like out of left field, that not only is this movie getting made, but that Ryan Reynolds is the one making it.
I think that because he's so popular right now, like, he probably has a lot of weird ideas that he's been thinking about for a while. Like, Van Wilder's not making this movie. Like, he's not famous back then. Like, two guys and a girl in a pizza joint or whatever. Like, that Ryan Reynolds is not getting this made. Deadpool Ryan Reynolds is getting this made. And so I bet he has a lot of weird fucking ideas. And he's like, now I'm famous and I have all this clout, so I'm going to start making these weird fucking movies. It does kind of sound like a funny concept, but it sounds like an SNL sketch.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of him, he did tweet yesterday something that I thought was pretty funny. I don't know if you saw it. He goes, "It's the 4-year leak-iversary. Update, still searching for the bastard who leaked our test footage onto the internet, causing Deadpool to receive a green light. Taking over the investigation myself, #angry." So obviously it's tongue in cheek because everybody thinks that he's the one who did it. But I thought that was pretty funny. So yeah, you're right. He's the man who can get whatever he wants made now.
Yeah, like I said, it does sound like a fun idea, but yeah, I doubt you get him to do it, Macaulay Culkin, and then I don't know. I have a hard time believing that this actually gets made.
Yeah, I think people are seeming to forget the fact that Ryan Reynolds made a lot of shitty movies before Deadpool.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So maybe he's not the best judge of scripts. So we'll see. You mentioned earlier, when you were talking about Teen Titans Go, about the Batman movie and how Deathstroke was originally going to be part of that movie. And maybe that's why they didn't say Deathstroke. And there was a report that came out, and I mean, take it with a grain of salt because these reports are always like either close or pretty off base, but they're saying that Matt Reeves' Batman movie that he's looking to make is going to be based on Frank Miller's Year One, and that he's looking for younger Batman, a younger actor to play Batman. And I heard that he was looking at Jack Houston, who, let's see, he was in the Ben-Hur remake. He was on Boardwalk Empire, the guy with like half his face missing. I don't know what else he's been in, but I like him a lot as an actor, and I could see him as Batman. But I think for me, the biggest thing here is that they're saying it's going to be based on Year One, and Batman Begins was very Year One-esque. So I don't know that I need to see another Batman origin movie. Between Batman Begins and Gotham, I'm all origined out. I'd rather just see him kind of in his peak crime fighting and going about it that way. But yeah, that's what the reports are saying.
So I have a couple of things that that kind of bug me about this. First of all, so is it going to be like a prequel to what we've seen in Batman v Superman? Like, is that what they're going for? And it's just going to be like Year One? Like, so is it going to be Ben Affleck's Batman?
At this point,
they're just going to recast it.
I don't know. At this point, I think they're just going to let him do whatever the fuck he wants. I mean, they're making a Joker movie out of continuity. So if Matt Reeves really wants to make a Batman movie out of continuity, I'm sure they'll let him.
But my thing is, if it is Ben Affleck's Batman, then why not just have Ben Affleck do it? Like, he's a grown-ass man. He's not going to look like Jack Houston. Like, Jack Houston isn't going to eventually look like Ben Affleck.
Correct.
So that's the thing that kind of bugs me. I know why they did it for Solo, because obviously Harrison Ford is super old and you can't make him look younger, but you can make Ben Affleck look a little younger to do his own goddamn origin story.
Yeah, like just, if anything, they're trying to make him look older in Batman v Superman by putting like gray in his hair and stuff. Like, just dye his hair black and say he's 28 years old or whatever the fuck. Like,
yeah, go full Creed from The Office.
Either way, like, I think that it'd probably be out of continuity at this point. I think DC's kind of abandoning ship on just making sure everything's connected, and they're more focused on let's just make a good movie. So hopefully that happens. I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, obviously I have faith in Matt Reeves to do something good. Like, I wasn't coming off of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I wasn't crazy about War, but now that I've watched it a couple of times since then, it's a really good movie. I mean, I didn't dislike it coming off of Dawn, but obviously Dawn being my favorite movie of all time, like, it had huge shoes to fill. But I mean, he really hasn't done a bad movie. Like, I'm not crazy about Let Me In. To be honest with you,
I love that movie.
I never got into that movie at all. I've seen it a couple of times and I just can't get into it, but it's a good movie and I love Cloverfield. So yeah, I mean, I have faith that he's going to make at least a fairly competent movie. Like, I feel like with his eyes closed, he could make a better movie than DC has made so far.
Yeah. We'll see, man. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully it comes out or it goes into production soon. Like, I feel like it's been announced for like a year and nothing else has been heard about it. So I really hope that they kind of get the ball rolling because I would love to see another Batman movie soon. So, speaking of Planet of the Apes, though, Mowgli, see what I did there? Mowgli, who's being written, directed by Andy Serkis, is not going to be released by Warner Brothers anymore. So apparently they reached a deal with Netflix, and it is going to be released on Netflix instead of in theaters this October, like originally planned. And we're looking at a 2019 release at some point for it. So I think you and I have talked about Mowgli a couple times. I want to say we talked about it when the trailer came out. Obviously, I don't know that either of us are jonesing for another live-action Jungle Book movie, but I think that this is a smart play for Netflix. Like, being able to release a movie like this just whenever and people can watch it is like one of the novelties of having Netflix, and one of the only reason why we saw and reviewed Cloverfield Paradox, even though that movie was shitty. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope that they do a surprise release like they did with Cloverfield Paradox too, because you know, whether or not I'm excited for this movie, I'm going to fucking watch it because I have Netflix already, so.
Yeah, I'm just a little confused. So it was going to come out in October. Maybe they didn't think that they were going to make that release date, and maybe that factored into this thing, but I doubt that that is the case. It just seems like if it was going to be ready in October, they buy it from Netflix. I don't know how all of those things work, obviously, but it seems like it would still be ready in October. Like, just give it to us in October. Why the 2019?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that they're going to hang on to it and use it as a publicity stunt like they did with Cloverfield.
Yeah.
Maybe they're going to release it at, like, the night of the Super Bowl. Who knows?
That'd be pretty cool. I mean, do it 2 years in a row. But, I mean, I'm not super crazy about a new Jungle Book movie. Honestly, if it wasn't for Andy Serkis, I probably wouldn't be, I wouldn't care at all about this movie, to be honest with you. That's my bias. Like, I'll be upfront about it. Like, I would not care about this movie at all. But he definitely seems to be pretty passionate about it. We kind of talked about this a little bit. Our third plug for Fortnite Friday of this episode, but we kind of discussed it a little bit, when we were playing. Like, they made the live action Jungle Book. Like, this movie was already, like, in plan. Like, they were already planning a pre-production, for Mowgli, when they talked about doing Jungle Book. And obviously Jungle Book has been released a couple of years ago and it got rave reviews and it was fantastic. But he's obviously still really passionate about this project, that they didn't just dump it after that movie came out. So he's obviously very, very passionate about it. So I'm curious to see what his movie is going to be, but I don't care about it. Like, I don't care that much about the story to see another Jungle Book movie. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't watch this movie.
Cool, man. So, last story before we get into our main topic is that the official cast was announced for Star Wars Episode 9. They start filming, I believe, next week. So, everybody that you would expect to be back is back. In addition, Mark Hamill will be back. So, they just went ahead and announced that and eliminated any question around if Luke's Force Ghost will show up or not. Spoilers. And they also announced that Carrie Fisher will be back in some footage that was shot and not used whenever JJ was making The Force Awakens. So she will be featured in the movie. I'm kind of curious at what capacity, but those were the two big ones. And then, of course, we already knew that Billy D. Williams would be back as well as Lando. So the other big thing, I guess, that came out of that press release is they announced, like, this is the last movie in the Skywalker saga. So I'm curious what that means for Kylo Ren. I guess he's not technically he's half Skywalker kind of, right? But, his last name's Solo. So I'm just curious if he bites the dust in this movie or, rides off on a horse into the sunset or what that looks like. But either way, it's kind of bittersweet, but kind of disappointing. But I really hope that JJ brings it home.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like he's kind of the perfect person to do this type of movie. And normally, I think if it was anybody else, I'd be kind of nervous that they're using footage that they didn't use just to fit her into this movie. But like you said, they're saying that it's the last of the Skywalker saga, and it would just feel empty. Like it would, well, maybe not empty, but it would feel like there was a piece missing if you didn't have at least somewhat her in this movie somewhat. And I like the fact that they came out and said, like, we're not doing CGI or anything like that. So I appreciate that they're trying to get her in the movie the best way that they feel that they can get her in this movie. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, man. So that's all I have for nerd news.
All right, so real quick, we've been talking about this, and Tyler doesn't know that I'm about to say this, but we've been kind of talking about this for the last couple of months, and I wanted to get your guys' feel on this. So we have been running late a lot recently, and I think the last like 3 or 4 episodes we've started Nerd News like at like 40, 45 minutes, and so these episodes are getting a little long. We had an idea that we may cut out Nerd News, not entirely, but maybe make it like, oh, when there's something big like the James Gunn thing or the Star Wars story, I think would be big enough for us to talk about as kind of like a separate, like a miniature issue, or not issue, episode that we would put out throughout the week. Like, we're still going to do our Monday episodes, normal episodes where we do what we're into, comics, and then the main topic, and then, of course, nerd favorite. And then when something came up that we wanted to talk about, we would make like a 15, 20-minute episode where we just focus on that. So I wanted to get your guys' feedback. I might contact a couple of you personally, so be on the lookout for that. But just tweet at us or comment on our Facebook or whatever you want to do. Let us know what you think of that idea. That way we're not putting out an hour and a half, hour and 45-minute episodes each week.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I just personally speaking, I think some of these stories I would have maybe gone more in depth on my feelings or my opinions, but with us running so late, I chose to kind of try to speed through nerd news. So if anything, nerd news might not be getting the attention that we want to give it because it's the last thing before the main topic and we're getting to it so late. So I think that mini episodes would be fun, but again, it's what you guys want. So just let us know. Yeah,
for sure. And another aspect to kind of the other side of that coin is there are weeks where it's just like, oh, well, you have 2 or 3 stories, and would those stories make nerd news on a different week? And sometimes it's kind of like we force it. So it'd be nice to just get to the main topic, because I'm sure if you're new to this podcast, you're probably, oh, well, I just really want to hear what they think about Mission Impossible or whatever they're reviewing. So yeah, that's a thought. If you guys want it to stay, obviously that you're the reason we do this. So if you say, hey, keep it, then we'll keep it, and we'll just make an hour and 45-minute episodes from now on. But that was just a thought that we were kind of thinking about maybe implementing. So anyways, we are going to be reviewing Mission Impossible Fallout, which is the 6th Mission Impossible movie. It was written and directed by Christopher McQuarrie, who directed Jack Reacher. He also, I think he wrote and directed the latest Mission Impossible before this, Rogue Nation. He also wrote one of my favorite sci-fi movies of the last probably 5-6 years, Edge of Tomorrow. If you call it Live, Die, and Repeat, I will punch you in the dick, because that is not the name of the movie. But he is actually also the first director to direct more than one of these movies. And also, I just thought that this was a cool piece of trivia. Solomon Lane, the bad guy in this movie, played by Sean Harris, is the first villain to return for a second installment too. So this movie did have a couple of firsts in it. So Mission Impossible Fallout is, of course, following the capture of Lane. A faction of the syndicate dubbed the Apostles, led by a terrorist named John Lark, are in the market for plutonium to build 3 nuclear weapons. Ethan Hunt, of course, played by Tom Cruise, and his IMF team, played by Simon Pegg and Ving Rhames, must do everything in their power to stop them. So I was looking forward to this movie. I know as part of our Rotten Tomatoes film draft, which at this point, Tyler might as well just start thinking about what he's going to make me do, because I would have never guessed. Obviously, I would have never guessed, because I would have picked this first if I'd known that it was going to be at like a 90, what was it, like a 96 or something the last time I looked at it?
I think it's 97.
Really?
It's gone
That's
down a
crazy.
percent last day.
So yeah, it's insane how well this movie is doing. So I mean, I was looking forward to it. I like the Mission Impossible movies, but it's not like, ooh, like a new Mission Impossible movie's coming out. Like, they're fun summer popcorn movies. So I was definitely looking forward to this. There's really, and I think we might have talked about this when we reviewed Rogue Nation, but there's really not a bad one. Like, I know people shit on the second one, because especially the third act gets really John Woo-y. Like, you could tell that he did that movie at the start of the third act, because it gets really like, there's a ton of just like gun battles and slow-mo. I'm pretty sure there's gotta be a scene of like doves flying away in slow-mo, because that's basically his signature shot. But other than that, like, even that movie, I don't think is bad. It's just, I mean, it's very John Woo-y, but I don't think that's necessarily bad. But for a franchise that has 6 movies now, there's not a like overwhelmingly bad movie. And so they're fun popcorn summer movies. And so I was definitely looking forward to this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I was as well. I mean, obviously I don't think either of us thought it was going to be really over with the critics, because I took it my second to last pick in the Rotten Tomatoes film draft. And I think my mindset there was, sure, Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Mission Impossible 3 have all been great, but like realistically, how long can these movies continue to be great? And at what point do people start to get sick of Tom Cruise? Which I think that time has kind of passed with like all of the Scientology and all of that stuff. So I'm always hesitant when he has a movie come out, like whether it's going to be good or bad. And I think that those were my thoughts here. So, yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear what you thought, but I would say that I would have been looking forward to it more had I not seen the trailer 40 times in the last 2 months, because it was attached to every movie I went and saw. But, besides
just do
that,
the joke.
I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. But no, I was looking forward to it.
So you're going to make me do the joke for you?
The joke is, I wouldn't have been surprised if they had shown the trailer for Mission Impossible Fallout while I was watching Mission Impossible Fallout, because I saw it so many goddamn times.
Yeah, so I actually think I've seen that before. I think when we went and saw Beauty and the Beast, there was like this weird promo for Beauty and the Beast, and I looked at my wife, I was like, they're promoting a movie that we're already here to see.
You got me already. I'm here. Yeah. You already got me. Your work's done.
Sure. So, our first segment, like we break down these reviews, like we break down each episode of the podcast. And the first segment is just broad strokes. So as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I've talked about this before. We don't pay attention to reviews. So I knew that this was getting good reviews. It was part of our Rotten Tomatoes film draft, like we mentioned. So I was kind of looking at the score, but I don't really pay attention to the actual reviews themselves. So I knew people were liking this, but I usually don't click on these, but my click discipline wasn't very good this particular day. I think I was bored at work. They always have like these like first Twitter reaction like news stories on like IGN and like comicbook.com and stuff like that. And I clicked on one of them and I saw a couple of people that said something to the effect that this is the Dark Knight of the Mission Impossible franchise. And I just want to say, stop saying shit like that. Because for me, honestly, like I get what they're trying to say. Like it's above and beyond the quality of Mission Impossible movies. Like I get what they're trying to say, and I get that it's like a clickbaity, like really like easy analysis thing to say. Like it's a very Twitter thing to say. Just stop saying it. Because for me, like The Dark Knight, and we've talked about this before, is not just a great superhero movie, but it's also a great crime movie that just happens to have Batman in it. So when you say something is a Dark Knight, for me, that means it's almost a near perfect movie. Because that's what I think of when I think of The Dark Knight. Literally, I've heard that being said about so many movies. And literally, since The Dark Knight has been released, that was almost exactly 10 years ago, there has been one movie that has been the Dark Knight of its franchise, and that's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. So stop saying that.
I thought you were going to say the only movie that's been the Dark Knight of his franchise was The Dark Knight.
Yeah. No, there's been one, and that's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. So for me, when you say it's the Dark Knight of the franchise, you have set impossible standards for this movie. Pun intended. I had that written down because I wanted to do that pun. I did not want to forget to do that stupid Mission Impossible pun. But yeah, you just set the bar so fucking high for this movie. And while I still think that it is exactly what you expect from a Mission Impossible movie, just a fun action summer movie, it never came close to being the Dark Knight of its franchise. It never came close to that, just like more than just a summer movie.
I will say before I get into my broad strokes, I think this is shaping up to be the Dark Knight of podcast episodes.
This is going to by far be our best episode.
So as far as broad strokes for me goes, this was probably realistically the most fun I've had at the movie since Infinity War. So there are some issues with this film here and there, and it's definitely too long. But at the end of the day, I was on the edge of my seat for the majority of it, and I just had a lot of fun, even though it recycled some tropes like a bomb countdown in the finale of the movie. I completely bought into it, and I had a blast. It's up there with any action movie for me, and it's crazy for me how this franchise is still putting out quality. I really did have a lot of fun here.
Yeah, I mean, you brought it up and we'll just jump right into our story portion of the review. You brought up that this movie does kind of recycle tropes, and that's kind of a thing with this franchise. Like, and it happens a couple of times in this movie where, like, just some character shows up at the exact moment that they need to show up, and they kind of save the day. And, or in this movie's case, they kind of throw like a wet blanket on what was happening in the movie. So I just think that that's kind of tropey, but you get that in all of these movies. And that's why I say, like, it's exactly what you expect from a Mission Impossible movie. It's just like this fun summer action movie that, you know, with this movie and with these movies in general, I don't want to say that you necessarily have to turn your brain off, because it does do some stuff and it is smart that I'm about to, like, there's a couple of things that I did appreciate with this story that I'm about to dive into. But yeah, it's definitely a little tropey. I will say that, like I said in the intro to this review, this is the first time a villain has been reused, and I'm really glad. I really liked that the IMF finally found their match in the Syndicate in Rogue Nation, and then I appreciate that they brought him back. And a lot of that has to do with Sean Harris, and I'll get to performances here in a little bit, but I really like him. Like, I think that he does a phenomenal job as Solomon Lang. Like, he has this weird, like, mysterious way about him. Like, he kind of, anytime he kind of talked, it kind of gave me chills. So I think that he does a really good job. I will say that the Apostles, like the group that he kind of leads, doesn't play a huge role in this movie. They're kind of introduced, and they do play a small part here and there throughout the film, but really there's just kind of like in the background, like these henchmen, and they're kind of built up at the very beginning of this movie to be like this ultimate squad. Like, you had the Syndicate, which was this hardcore, like, villain IMF-esque, and then you have these Apostles, which were kind of built as this, like, even hardcore version of the Syndicate, and they just really don't play a role in this movie, which is kind of disappointing. Like I said, I did like Lane, though. I think he's probably the best villain in the Mission Impossible franchise since Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, so I'm really glad that they brought him back. I think that a lot of the story elements in this movie were predictable, and they were tropey, like I said, especially the identity of John Lark. As soon as you see a character, you know that it's that person. Like, obviously, we're not going to spoil anything, but as soon as you see a particular character, a particular actor, like, you know, okay, that's who that is. Like, you get it as soon as they introduce the character of John Lark. Like, at the very beginning, when you hear, like, and they're being super secretive about who it could possibly be, you know that it's going to end up being a part of the movie later on, and I just immediately knew who that person was when you first see that character. So I thought that was pretty predictable. I will say that a lot of these scenes were really well crafted. And I'm not just talking about the action, but I think as the story is concerned, even though, like I said, it was a little bit predictable, I think that a lot of these scenes were well crafted, especially the very beginning. So this movie starts off, and I don't think that this is too much of a spoiler, but basically they have this mission and they fail. And obviously, judging by the title, you have Mission Impossible Fallout. It's kind of the fallout from them fucking this mission up. And I definitely appreciated the fact that at the beginning that had consequences throughout the movie. And one of the consequences, like the very next scene, is you have this, like, they're in this hospital room and they have the news where like a bunch of bombs have gone off. And that scene is so well done and so well acted, especially by the guy that is in the hospital bed, and I should have written down his name, but I thought he did a phenomenal job. It actually reminded me a lot of the Philip Seymour Hoffman interrogation scene in Mission Impossible 3. Like, I think that it was just so well done in this movie, and the twist actually got me. Like, at the end of the scene, like, I did not know that was gonna happen. And a lot of this movie was kind of predictable. And that was one of the rare cases where I was like, fuck, that was really, really cool. Like, I did not see that coming. So I was definitely, excited about that. And it definitely set the stage for, okay, I'm gonna like this movie. Like, despite some of the tropiness and despite some of the predictable storytelling, just from that scene, I was like, okay, I'm gonna enjoy this movie. And I really appreciate that they tried to do more. Like, they tried to be the Dark Knight of the Mission Impossible franchise. Like, I like that there was some moral dilemma in here. Like, they kept kind of hitting on Ethan Hunt and how he's not willing to take that next step. He's not willing to kill people or let people die. And he has to continually struggle because of that, especially with the policeman. In towards like the middle of the movie, I thought that was a really effective scene, and I think I would have liked some of that stuff if it wasn't so heavy-handed. Like, I appreciate that they try to put that in there, but they put it in there so hard that it was just like, oh, you guys, you see what we're doing here? Like, how could we not understand what you're doing because you're being super, super heavy-handed about it? So that was a little disappointing because I think I would have enjoyed those scenes a little bit better if they weren't like beating us over the head with it. But all in all, I think that this is exactly what you go into a Mission Impossible movie for. Like, I keep saying it, it's like a really fun summer movie, and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think that we're too far off base. I think you're a little harder on it than I'm going to be, but I mean, in my mind, the Mission Impossible movies are just always so much fun, and you always look to the action for that fun, but the story has to be really important too, because it has to make you care about all of these action set pieces. And I think sometimes in these Mission Impossible movies, the stories always get a little too convoluted, and I think that there is some of that in this movie, but again, the story has to matter because you have to care about why this guy is jumping out of a plane at 25,000 feet, or why there's a car chase in Paris, or why there's a game of helicopter chicken. All of these things, you can't just rely on, well, I've known Ethan Hunt for 22 years now. Like, there has to be a good reason for it. And I think that this movie does a decent job of making you care about these action set pieces. I think they did a really good job of bringing in pieces of Ethan's past and forcing him to have to make choices around saving members of his team or potentially giving up the plutonium that the villains are after. Speaking of plutonium, even though the fight over it in this movie is definitely a trope, I thought it was set up well and forced our heroes' hands in a few places. For me, there were also enough twists and turns throughout the movie that elicited gasps from the crowd that I was in, which really captured my imagination and my buy-in. I think part of the reason that I love this movie so much is because I had a really good audience that I saw it with. Like, these people were like on the edge of their seats, like really bought into the movie. And then that kind of amped me up as well. I think at the end of the day, what I really love about Ethan Hunt as a character is that he's very human. I think a lot of times in action movies, especially action movies that have been around for 6 films, your hero almost becomes godlike and will take out armies of bad guys by himself. And I think the character of Ethan is great because he makes poor decisions and needs the help of his friends and his team. At the end of the day, like, he's always going to fix the problem and save the day, but it doesn't involve him mowing down armies of guys or, going hand-to-hand combat with 10 other guys twice his size and winning. I think that the stakes in this movie are very global, but they also feel very intimate, which makes them more relatable and it makes you care more, which to me is, at the end of the day, great storytelling, because I really am invested in what happens to these members of the IMF team. And I mean, yeah, Ethan's at the center of that, but it makes you care about Simon Pegg and it makes you care about Ving Rhames. And I think that that's really important at this stage in the franchise.
Yeah, for sure. And it does sound like you're a little bit more positive than I was. And I can't forgive some of the tropiness of this movie. And it sounds like you could, and that might have a lot to do with, like you said, with your audience participation. I didn't bring this movie up. I was going to, but then I ended up bringing up Sorry to Bother You. But I had a similar theater experience with Equalizer 2. Like there was a car scene in that movie that is probably the coolest car chase scene that I've seen since probably Baby Driver. And like people literally cheered after it happened. And I was like, normally I hate when that happens, but I was like, yeah, fuck yeah, that was awesome. Like I didn't really like Equalizer 2, but I thought that was really cool. And so that definitely enhances your theater viewing experience.
Sure.
All right. So let's move on to the performances. I've said this before, and I think I even kind of maybe was a little too hard on him with Man from U.N.C.L.E., but I do not think that Henry Cavill is a very good actor. And I think that this is probably the best that you're going to get from him. Like, I didn't think he was horrible. Like, Man from U.N.C.L.E., I thought he was just awful. Like, he was just a pretty face in that movie. I mean, rightfully so, because I'm pretty sure I would fuck him. But,
dude, let's be honest, he would fuck you.
Yeah, well, yeah. But, he's alright in this movie. Like, it wasn't, like, egregious that he was bad and stiff and just, like, constipated in this movie. Like, I think he was in Man from U.N.C.L.E. So, it wasn't horrible, but like I said, I think this is probably the best you're gonna get from him. I will say the real question going into this movie, was the mustache worth it? And I really don't think that it was. I mean, it was a decent mustache, but I mean, it's gonna sound silly because what does a mustache bring to a character? But there was no need for the mustache, so I don't understand why they dug in so hard about that stupid fucking mustache. The only thing that I can think of, and this is probably the case actually, the more I think about it, is the fact that there was so much production problems with this movie because of Tom Cruise, not, basically refusing to have a stuntman do his stunts. He kept getting hurt. I wonder if it was just we've already filmed some stuff with Henry Cavill with the mustache. We can't wait for him to grow another mustache. So I wonder if that had played any part in it. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't really worth it. The mustache didn't bring anything to the character. So yeah, it was just kind of weird. It sucked that was such a big story that I kept thinking about his fucking stupid mustache throughout this movie. Anytime he was on the screen, I was like, oh, that's a decent mustache, but I don't know if it was worth the fucking just awfulness that was, that in Justice League. Not that I think that would have saved the movie, but, anyways. So Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise in this movie. It's hard for me because of some of the stuff that you said earlier, him being basically a crazy person. It's so hard for me to separate his characters from it being Tom Cruise. And I think that I saw that a lot in this movie. I just recently watched Oblivion for the first time. And ultimately, I didn't really like that movie that much, but his performance was really good in that movie. And it was kind of the first time in a while, maybe since Edge of Tomorrow, that I was able to kind of separate him from the movie that I was watching. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that in this movie. And honestly, I think that was mostly because there are a couple of scenes in this movie where he's asked to do some, I wouldn't say comic relief, but there's a scene earlier in the movie where him and Simon Pegg are supposed to not necessarily riff off of each other, but just kind of have a comedic moment between the two of them, have kind of a funnier conversation. And he just looks so uncomfortable doing that. He just looks so stiff and constipated. And Simon Pegg's being Simon Pegg. He obviously has really good comedic timing, and that's what he's in these movies for. but I just don't think that Tom Cruise, like, that's not in his wheelhouse. And he just looks so uncomfortable and so stiff in those scenes when he's asked to do that. And it just kind of overemphasizes the fact that I just can't separate Tom Cruise from the character. And so that was kind of disappointing. The last thing that I want to bring up is, and I've already kind of shot my load with this, but Sean Harris is fantastic in this movie. He's not used a ton, but the little that he is used, he's used a little bit more in the third act, obviously, but the little that he is used in this movie, I just think that he does a fan-fucking-tastic job as a villain. Like, just the way that he plays this villain, it just makes my skin crawl every time he talks. And so I really appreciated his performance. And that's pretty much it for me. Like, there wasn't anybody else notable in this movie for me.
No, I mean, I think we say it every time we review something that has established characters. At this point, they've got their characters down. So when you look at Tom Cruise, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, like, they've all done this quite a few times at this point. So there's not much to complain about there. I will say, like, I get lost in Tom Cruise's eyes every once in a while, and then I have to snap myself out of it and be like, oh, don't forget, he's crazy. So, he's trying his hardest in these movies he's done over the last few years to try to get you to forget that he's a crazy person. But, I mean, that thought, like you said, is always going to linger in the back of your mind, and that's disappointing because these movies are a lot of fun. So, while his performance is not bad, his personal life is, and that definitely bleeds into the performance a little bit, unfortunately. Henry Cavill, like, whatever, he's fine. He is what he is. And I think that I agree with you that I don't think he's as bad as you say he is, but he's not great. So he was fine in this movie. And I think I agree. Like, this is the best you're going to get out of him. So just roll with it. I liked Rebecca Ferguson a lot. She obviously comes back from, Rogue Nation. I like her character and I like her performance as well. I really like Michelle Monaghan as an actress. I wish that she had more to do in this movie because she's not popping up near as much as she used to, but it was nice seeing her. And then Sean Harris, like you said, is fantastic. He was a great bad guy. And I think that, again, like they've kind of found their main villain for this franchise. He's the only one that's kind of popped back up. Angela Bassett and Alec Baldwin are both barely in it, and they both are fine as well. They're both great actors that have a historic filmography. So, I mean, no complaints there. So I would say, like, out of all of those names I listed off, there's no really bad performances in this movie. So that's pretty encouraging.
I was so nervous, like, going into this review after Luke Cage season 2. Like, we reviewed that, and I was like, man, maybe I should pull back a little bit on the Sean Harris stuff because I'm afraid that we're going to have a repeat of Luke Cage season 2 where I thought Mariah did a really good job. I still think I think you're wrong about that. But I was just like, oh man, is he going to disagree with me again? But I'm glad to hear that you like Sean Harris as well.
I don't know, man. I think that, so I haven't like dug into a lot of Luke Cage reviews, but I think for the most part, people say she's awesome. So I must be the odd man out here, but I feel like I'm taking crazy pills because she is fucking terrible. But I won't digress to last week, but yeah, whatever, man.
All right. So with these Mission Impossible movies, obviously we usually talk when we have these big summer action movies, we usually save a section for action. And this is a big one. This has a lot of action in it. And I mean, there's so much stuff. I mean, there's a car scene that's really cool. I will say, like I said, I think the Equalizer 2 did their car scene a little bit better, but that's kind of a staple of Mission Impossible is that you have to have a really cool car scene. I will say the motorcycle stuff in Rogue Nation, I think I liked that a little bit better, but it was still pretty cool in this movie as well. I think the two big ones in this movie is the bathroom scene, which is really cool. I heard that it was gonna be a lot better than I think ultimately it was for me. Like, I heard that it was just gonna like blow my fucking mind, and I think that's definitely another case of my expectations being a little bit high, but it is really cool. I did see somebody make fun of like, why is Henry Cavill like reloading his arms when he does that thing? And that kind of made me laugh because when I was watching the movie, I kept thinking about that. Like when that scene happens, cause you see that in the fucking trailer every goddamn time you see the trailer. And so I saw somebody like making fun about like, why is he reloading his arms? But I mean, he is Henry Cavill. He's fucking Superman. So if you had a body like that, I'm really gonna fuck this guy. I just realized as I was saying, I was like, man, if I ever gotta meet him, I'm gonna definitely fuck him. But like, if you look like that, why wouldn't you do stupid shit like that? So I thought that scene was really cool, and it kind of touches on something that you mentioned, like Ethan Hunt, even though he is a badass in this movie and all of his movies, he's not like invincible. And you definitely see that in the bathroom scene. Like he kind of gets his ass kicked. And so I definitely appreciated that. Like you said, like he's not just this indestructible guy. Like he definitely gets his ass kicked every once in a while. So I appreciate that. And then of course the helicopter scene, which is just phenomenal. Like it's so fucking cool.
Yeah, man, the action, if we were rating this movie based on action alone, it'd be hard not to give it a 4.5 or a 5 out of 5. Because the action is superb. These movies keep getting better. And I know that it's probably divisive around Tom Cruise doing his own stunts for the most part, because there are production delays when people do that because people get hurt. But I mean, I really respect the guy from that standpoint. I know you're not a fan of heights and I'm not a huge fan of heights, but him training for like a year to do that halo jump, is crazy. It's crazy to me. And Henry Cavill had to feel like a little bitch for being like, you know what? You do that. I'm going to peace out and let my stunt guy do that. So, I think that's impressive because again, Tom Cruise is like old as fuck at this point. So, more power to him. Like I hope they keep making these movies because they keep knocking it out of the park with the action. So the Halo jump scene was great. Like if that wasn't crazy enough, they're like, well, let's add a thunderstorm to it. And obviously that plays a role in that action sequence. It's like the crowd gasped at a certain point in that action sequence. So that was a lot of fun. You're right. The car chase was a lot of fun, but I do think Rogue Nation did it better. But anytime they're on motorcycles, that's breathtaking, especially when they're weaving through traffic. And then, you know, the final, I don't want to spoil too much about the final set piece, but you know, the helicopter part is great. And then what happens after the helicopter part, like it made me uncomfortable because it takes place like on, the side of a mountain, and I don't do well with those kinds of heights either. And there's a lot of falling and almost dying involved with that set piece. And, I thought that was great from like an edge of your seat standpoint. So all of it was really fun, man. I wish it wasn't as long as it was, but this action makes it feel a little shorter than that 2.5 hour runtime, which I appreciate.
For sure. And I think just to kind of hammer this point home, and I don't mean to like shit on Skyscraper more than we already did a couple of weeks ago, but we've talked about this before. Tyler has busted my balls about this before. I'm like terrified of heights. And I was kind of afraid going into Skyscraper that I was going to feel like that throughout the entire movie. But that movie never really connected with me, so I didn't really care. So like, I didn't care about the characters, but I'm glad that you brought this up because there is that scene at the end of the movie where they're kind of like hanging off the mountain. And I did have that. Like my butthole did clench a little bit, and it never did in Skyscraper at all. And that just kind of hammers home, like, I care about these characters. Like it did a better job. And maybe that's because we've seen some of these characters for 5-6 movies now. So maybe that certainly probably helped, but it just like the action was done so much better in that movie versus like a movie like Skyscraper that will be easily forgettable here and just even like a couple of months, I'll probably forget that I even saw that movie. So yeah, I think that is a good point for sure.
Awesome, man. So you ready to put a review on this thing?
Yeah, for sure. What'd you give it out of 5 stars?
I am giving it a 4.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it doesn't, it seems like we should be closer together, but I ultimately gave it 3 just because it's a strong 3. I was, definitely kind of going back and forth between 3.5. I think we give way too much thought into the number of it. But, yeah, I was kind of going back and forth because I did really like the action, quite a lot. But ultimately, some of the predictable stuff and the tropey stuff really kind of got to me. So I'm going to go with 3.
So for what it's worth, a 3 we've said is a positive review. So if we were part of Rotten Tomatoes scoring, you would be contributing to its 97% score, for what it's worth.
Yeah, so I'm going to change it to actually a 2.5.
No,
I need all the help that I can get at this point.
I honestly thought that you were going to be harder on it because you alluded when we were during our Fortnite Friday broadcast that you had some issues, and obviously those came out. But I felt like your review was more positive than negative, so that's good stuff.
I also like to kind of fuck with you a little bit, and so it was kind of a little bit of that, like that. I was kind of like smiling to myself because I knew you were like, "Oh man, you didn't like it." Like, "Oh, I don't even want to go see it now." And I was like, "Yes, you gave me the exact reaction that I wanted."
Why would you do that? Like, whether I wanted to see it or not, I was going to have to sit through a 2.5-hour movie, so I dreaded it instead of being excited for it. So, if anything, you lowered my expectations.
Good. I think your expectations definitely needed to be a little bit lower. It's definitely not the Dark Knight of its franchise.
All right.
No, I just like fucking with you because I'm a bad friend.
Correct. But you're a good podcast co-host for what it's worth. So, all right, you ready for nerd favorite?
That's what matters. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day.
Jesus Christ, we're at an hour and a half. Can we please do goddamn nerd favorite?
It's your fucking week. Go.
So this isn't really a favorite anything. It was just a question that was trending on Twitter, I think either this week or last week, and it's dumb as fuck. But I thought that we would answer it because it kind of makes me smile whenever I imagine some of the answers people gave. So it was trending on Twitter, like if you could pick any movie and replace all of the characters but one with Muppets, what would it be? So I'm curious what your answer would be. I didn't put like a ton of thought into this, but for whatever movie, for whatever reason, the movie that jumped out to me as being my answer here was The Departed. And all of the characters are Muppets except for Jack Nicholson. And I don't know why, but whenever I imagine that movie now, it makes me like really giggle. Just thinking of some of those characters as Muppets and getting shot in the head, and the way that Jack Nicholson is really like this big personality in that movie, and him acting like that up against Muppets as being the other characters. Like, I just think that's hilarious. So that's my off the cuff answer, but there are some other really good ones out there as well. And I'm curious what yours would be.
So yeah, this question is dumb as fuck and I refuse to answer it. No, I'm kidding. I wanted to see how long I could get you to believe that I wasn't going to answer the question. No, we kind of had this similar like thought process, like what would be the funniest, like, and I think the funniest answer is just like a movie that's super intense and like characters are like reacting like their life hangs in the balance and they're like scared of fucking Muppets. And so my mind immediately went to like a zombie movie, like Dawn of the Dead or like Night of the Living Dead or something like that. Like, or maybe like 28 Days Later, except for all of the characters, like the infected characters are Muppets. And I just think that the idea of them like running away scared and like shooting Muppets and stuff like that would be fucking hilarious. So that's going to be my answer. Basically any zombie or like infected type of movie. I think if you just replace the zombies or the infected with Muppets, I think would be hilarious.
Yeah, that's a good one, man. Another good one I saw was Alien, except the xenomorph isn't a Muppet.
Yeah.
or like the cat's not a Muppet. Is that Alien or Aliens? I can't remember.
Alien is with the cat.
Okay, yeah, something like that. So I thought that was pretty funny too. But either way, I appreciate you indulging me for my dumb as fuck nerd favorite.
No, it was a good one. It's nice to kind of throw a curveball every once in a while.
Sure, man.
All right. So, as always, we'd appreciate if you subscribe, rate, or review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. We're probably on it. You can check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com, which is kind of the hub of everything the nerds you're looking for. We have our YouTube channel, our letterbox, like we said earlier. Mine is at the Nerds Podcast. Tyler's is that Tyler Hunt. You can also find all of our star ratings for any movie we've ever formally reviewed. You also have our Rotten Tomatoes film draft, which we reference a lot during these reviews and whatnot. You can check out all of our movies and the scores and whatnot. Also, you can check out our YouTube channel, like I said. But if you do go to YouTube pretty frequently, I'd appreciate if you comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerd You're Looking For. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Google+. And then finally, you can email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.